Welcome into the channel. Let's talk some Texans. Tytus Howard down for a while is what D'Amico Ryans had to say. And then Adam Schefter let us all know it's 4 to 6 weeks for the return of the Texans right tackle. We're talking about that today on the channel. I would appreciate a subscription down below to the YouTube page, a like if you enjoy this video. And of course, I have the link in the description to subscribe to my website, Houston Football. Let's get into it. 4 to 6 weeks for Tytus Howard after the hand injury. That's the timeline Schefter put on the return for Tytus Howard. Ian Rappaport of the NFL Network explained that Tytus Howard had hand surgery. So it was a pretty significant injury, something that he sustained in the scrimmage on Saturday. He had the surgery a couple of days later, and now it is 4 to 6 weeks before Tytus Howard is back. 34 days until the Houston Texans play the Baltimore Ravens in Baltimore. So when you start thinking about timelines, best case scenario is, yes, Tytus Howard is back. He plays week 1 against the Baltimore Ravens. That is certainly a possibility because you got about a week between when he's supposed to be ready in the best case timeline and when you actually play that game. That's a really aggressive timeline, though. You think about the hand usage for offensive linemen, how important it is, how you can't really have any sort of club on that hand and play effectively or any sort of restrictive brace and do some of the same things that you have been doing that made Howard one of the highest paid right tackles in all of football. So that's a very aggressive timeline. It's one that I don't necessarily believe is going to happen. So I don't believe Tytus Howard is going to be ready week 1 against the Baltimore Ravens, and that's pretty unfortunate because that's one of the best defenses the Texans are set to face all season long. So that aggressive timeline, that'd be great. I feel like it's far more realistic that he's back for week 2 against the Indianapolis Colts at home, or even week 3 against the Jacksonville Jaguars on the road. You desperately need him back for the 4th week of the season when the Pittsburgh Steelers are in town. So you got one of the best defenses in football to start the season, and then 3 weeks later, another fantastic defense. And if you remember, Tytus Howard has had some pretty decent success in his past against TJ Watt. So it'd be nice to have Howard back out there and maybe with a game or two under his belt by the time the Steelers are coming to town. So if Howard can get back on that aggressive timeline, that best case timeline, you'll see him out there 71 week 1 protecting CJ Stroud in Baltimore. If not, it may be week 2, week 3 for his return. Now, who's filling in for Tytus Howard in the meantime, in the rest of the preseason, in that potential week 1 absence for Howard? Who's filling in? Well, the guy's name's George Fant. And if you haven't heard of George Fant, he's played for the Jets the past few seasons. He played just about half the season for the Jets last year, 7 starts, 8 games he appeared in for the Jets last year. The Texans signed him right as training camp was getting going, and he was just okay last year. I mentioned it. He played in 8 games. He had 7 penalties in those 8 games and allowed 5 sacks in those 8 games. Now, I will say, Fant is the type of guy that was brought in to be a swing tackle. So this is something that he had to be ready for. And he filled in for Laremy Tunsil in a practice earlier in training camp, and he had a really nice day filling in for Laremy Tunsil at left tackle. So this is not a unproven, or this is not some journeyman. Fant has played a lot of football the past few seasons. Started his career with the Seahawks and now with the Jets and now ultimately on the Texans. So he's played a lot of football, so he's going to be the replacement. What it really does, though, is he was supposed to be the swing tackle. There's no more depth on this offensive line, and that's a scary proposition when you think about some of the injuries that have popped up, how physically demanding the offensive line is. There's no more depth here for this offensive line. Your center depth went down when Scott Quessenberry went down, and your tackle depth is now compromised until Tytus Howard is back because Fant's your right tackle, and there's not a real good option beyond Fant to be the backup tackle and the swing tackle for this team. The Texans have an undrafted free agent out of Auburn, Killian Zierer, And he's the guy that would be the swing tackle if they had to play a game tomorrow. With Fant starting at right tackle, Zierer would be the swing tackle. And Charlie Heck is hurt, so he's not an option right now. Now, Heck would maybe be the right tackle instead of Tytus Howard, with Howard down with the injury, if he was healthy, but he hadn't been healthy. He's still on the physically unable to perform list, the PUP list, and so Heck's not an option. Zierer as the swing tackle is a little scary, and you start thinking about the interior depth. Yes, you've got Michael Dieter, who's played a little bit of center and a little bit of guard, but this is an offensive line that was heavily invested in. You think about Tytus Howard's contract extension. Shaq Mason got a contract extension before he even played it down with these guys. And then the first-round selection that the team used last year on Kenyon Green, the second-round selection they used on Juice Scruggs. That's your offensive line right now. Sub Fant in for Howard while he's down with the injury, but there's no depth here. So I'm a little worried about that aspect of it. One more injury could spell a massive change in the way this offense operates or the way that they're able to pass block and run block as a team. So you got to hope that everybody stays healthy for the next few weeks and will stay healthy until Tytus Howard is back. And ultimately, that left tackle to right tackle alignment that is Tunsil, Green, Scruggs, Mason, and Howard can play a ton of games together. Couple of impact pieces of Howard being down. Well, the first is the pass blocking takes a little bit of a step back. George Fant's not as good as Tytus Howard, so that takes a bit of a step back. I'm not super worried about Laramie Tunsil from that pass blocking perspective, but maybe it shifts some of the attention away from the interior. People try to attack Fant. You've got the offensive, or you got the tight ends to help him maybe out on that side if you need the help early on, maybe against Baltimore and against the Colts if Howard is missing those first two games of the season. And then from a run blocking perspective, Tytus had been a bit of a mauler at different times. This offense in previous years has run right and been right behind Tytus and let him get out there and make some big plays. They've had some nice runs behind Tytus in training camp. So that takes a step back as well from just obviously the offense takes a step back because you're inserting a backup for a starter, but it could be a significant step back in both of those areas if Fant doesn't play up to his potential. Now, again, played pretty well when he filled in for Laramie Tunsil that one practice, but that's one practice in training camp. How's that going to be in a couple of preseason games and ultimately maybe a couple of regular season games as well? And while Howard is out, it puts a lot of pressure on that interior offensive line. It feels like it's been years since we felt comfortable about the interior offensive line of the Houston Texans. And that offensive line's interior, there's some pressure on those guys. I know Shaq Mason's a proven commodity in this league, but Nick Caserio extended him without him ever playing a down in a Texans uniform. That's unusual. You don't see a lot of teams do that. Caserio has a lot of belief in him. And he's a proven commodity, but he, along with Kenyon Green at left guard and Juice Scruggs at center, and there's a lot of pressure to have those guys play up to their potential. And Green's got to improve a lot. Scruggs, didn't start training camp as the first team center. Now he's the first team center after the injury to Quessenberry. There's a lot of pressure there to have those three guys be solid, because if you've got some issues in the interior offensive line and Fant doesn't play well for however long Howard's down, well, then that offensive line that we believed was going to be one of the better units that was heavily invested in, it starts to sink down in its usefulness. It starts to sink down in its performance, and it becomes one of those things that, maybe it's not a hindrance, but it's not helping you. That's the goal for this highly invested offensive line, is this offense that they're going to run under Bobby Slowick. It's got the ability to operate when you don't have elite players and you don't have elite talent. But you see what San Francisco was able to do the past couple of years when they dropped in a better offensive line and some of those guys played better. And you start to think about, really raising the stakes, adding to what this offense can do. If that impressive offensive line from a financial commitment standpoint plays up to their dollar figure and their investment level, that's something that you could really get excited about. We may not see that right off the jump because Tytus Howard's down with that injury. I hope he gets better soon. It was going to be fun to watch him. He and Laramie Tunsil, one of the best tackle duos in all of football. And now I would think at least one game into the regular season, maybe two, before Tytus Howard gets back. I hope I'm wrong, though. I hope Tytus Howard's got that Wolverine healing and he gets back in time, can get some practices in, can get comfortable, and he's out there helping pass block week 1 for the Houston Texans as they're on the road in Baltimore to take on the Ravens. It's an aggressive timeline, and if Tytus Howard can get back, that's fantastic. I don't expect him back for week 1. I think week 2 is when we're going to see Tytus Howard, when the Indianapolis Colts are in Houston to take on the Texans at NRG Stadium. That's when I believe we're going to get Tytus Howard's season debut. So we're not going to get 17 games, if I'm right, with the offensive line, but I'll take 16. I'll sign up for 16 games right now of the expected offensive line that we were about to see from this team. Heck, I'd sign up for 15 if Howard even needed an extra week into the regular season. Hope he doesn't, but that's all for today on Tytus Howard. We'll be monitoring, see if the team adds any sort of veteran to maybe help shore up the tackle depth on the roster. That's something to pay attention to over the next couple of days as well. Or on cutdown day, if they don't feel good about the tackle depth, when the entire league cuts down from 90 to 53, is there a player or players that they may chase or like to have instead of some of their other options for depth? That's something to pay attention to in the next couple of days. And George Fant, it's your job at right tackle until Tytus Howard is back healthy. It's your job to enjoy the Texans content here on the channel. Appreciate you. Would appreciate a thumbs up on the video. Share it with your friends if you enjoyed the video. Subscription to the YouTube, and check out Houston Football. The link is in the description. www.houfootball.com is where you can find all my writing on the Texans. Can't wait to talk Texans again with you soon.